What's going on, guys? Hope everyone's having a great day. Today we had on Kevin Anderson. He is a professor at UMass, and he is working on a really cool project called The Future of Coffee. It's a documentary that he's looking to turn into a documentary series. So we get into a very interesting conversation about that. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Go check out The Future of Coffee on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all that. They have some pretty cool behind the scenes content of them making the documentary. And yeah, it'd be awesome to get some support behind them. So if you can, go check them out. Thanks. You guys have an awesome day. Enjoy the podcast. So, hey, man, how's it going? How have you been?
I've been doing pretty well. I'm on sabbatical this semester, so that pretty much sums it all up. It's pretty nice taking a break from teaching.
Oh, that's awesome. And we talked before the podcast a little bit about this project you're working on. It's super interesting. I don't know if you want is that why you're on sabbatical, or was it just something you're doing while you're on sabbatical?
Yeah. At UMass, you have to apply for sabbatical. I mean, even after a certain amount of years, you're kind of eligible for it, but you have to say, well, I'd like to take it this particular semester for this reason, and then the dean decides whether or not that's
Mm.
okay. The dean decided that was okay. So I basically, in my request, I said I've been researching this film and this TV series for like 6 years, and then COVID hit in 2020, and that just stopped everything. I was getting ready to start shooting that summer of 2020, but that obviously you just couldn't have happened. So it slowed everything down, and then I decided, well, I think I'll apply for sabbatical and try to make the film, or at least shoot the majority of the film during the course of the spring semester 2023. And I applied to the university for a couple different grants, and fortunately, I got some through the university. I got some money through my college. I got some money through my department. So I have some money, but I'm not working with much of a budget at all. But enough to fly out to the West Coast and do some filming out there, things like that. And to solve the crew problem, which I just did not have the money. I didn't have the budget to hire professionals, where I'm going. So what I'm doing is there's a number of really good, like I would say, like kind of top level comm students and film study students who are really good at camera and sound and lighting and composing and editing. And so they are the crew. So
Okay.
they're taking 3 credits of independent study with me, and that's essentially their kind of their payment, or that's how I'm able to reciprocate their times, that they get academic credit and they work on the film. So say just yesterday, 4 of us drove up to Maine and back, Portland and back in one day, which is doable. It's not
Yeah.
bad. Traffic wasn't bad, and it was a Sunday. There was a special event going on at a roastery up there called Coffee by Design. Great folks up there. I think I have a card even. Yeah, Coffee by Design, and
Oh,
they had a
okay.
couple. They had a couple special events at their roastery. So we drove up, we filmed a bunch of footage, did some social media stuff, came back down. So
Okay.
that's kind of how we're doing it. We're getting probably 1 to maybe 2 shoots in a week regionally
So
around the Northeast.
that's pretty awesome. And so like just for the audience, I don't know if you want to introduce kind of like the idea behind the project and just so they get a feel for like kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So the project is, what we're making it is a documentary film, which essentially, or ideally, will serve as the pilot episode for an 8 to 9 part travel/food series called The Future of Coffee. And in this series, we're celebrating coffee, but at the same time, we're examining various, kind of social and environmental issues on a rather global scale. So we're looking at supply chains, we're looking at globalization, labor issues, environmental issues, climate change issues, all through the lens of the coffee industry and the ways in which the industry of coffee has been and is continuing to be affected by these things. And so we're asking this question of everybody: what do you think the future of coffee is? And some people are saying, the industry pivoted after COVID, and we're getting ready for the next thing that'll come, and we're thinking up creative ways to change the industry to adapt to these kind of pressures. And some people are being a little less optimistic and saying, look, man, did you know the average age of a farmer in coffee growing region in Central America is 70?
Oh my
The average
gosh.
the average age of a coffee picker in Central America is 60.
Oh my God.
That's not sustainable.
No, I
That
mean,
people, the young people are not coming into the industry, or I shouldn't say they're not, but there's not enough of them coming into the industry. I mean, just if you don't have people to run these farms and you don't have people to pick these cherries, the coffee cherries, that's a massive, massive blow to the industry. So
absolutely.
the professionals, they're very concerned about. It's not just the labor issue. That's one issue. There's other things as well.
That's something I didn't even know about. So I'm guessing there's actually kind of like a whole bag of tricks kind of that you guys are gonna be pulling out, that a lot of people don't realize about their everyday drink.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the kind of subtitles to the series is "The Brew You Thought You Knew."
Mm-mm. I like that. That's a good name for a segment or whatever that will end up
Yeah,
being.
I think that'll end up being one of the episodes when we talk about, I think, the science of coffee. There's a whole episode devoted to that, and we talk about, it's not a bean, it's a
Yeah.
fruit, the pit of a fruit that's separated from the fruit, and then it's washed and processed and roasted and this and that. So a lot of interesting things. I mean, since I started diving into the research since 2017, it's just been a wonderful world of discovery. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. So what really got your attention drawn to coffee and making like a documentary film on coffee? Because it seems like such a niche thing to make. Well, I guess not so much actually anymore. If you will watch the YouTube videos, there's a lot of um, pull to like making different coffee in different ways, using
Yeah.
like Chemex and all different sorts of things. And a lot of people love doing cinematography on.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's some gorgeous documentaries out there where it's just like these very elaborate. It looks like a high end chemist's lab, but they're doing coffee, and then they're pour overs and elaborate filtration systems and things like that. And I find that stuff really fascinating. And more people, because of the pandemic, started home brewing because they couldn't go to their cafe to get their coffee just the way they wanted it because the cafe wasn't open anymore. So home brewing has really grown during the pandemic and in the aftermath of the pandemic. Um, but to get back to the idea of the series, I mean, while we want to celebrate coffee, it's not a series about just specialty coffee, and it's not a series about where do you get the best espresso in Rome, and why do the Japanese have all the best coffees and things like that. It's really looking at the industry and its sustainability. And in doing so, we talk to high-end specialty coffee roasters and importers and things like that. But we're also looking at, everyday, kind of, in some sense, like the ubiquity of coffee. I mean, coffee is everywhere. This is one of the things that comes up in the opening narration. I talk about how, wherever we go, there's coffee. There's a party, there's a coffee. There's a meeting, there's coffee. At work, there's coffee. Roadside, I mean, it's just everywhere, as if it's waiting for us. And the thing is, its stability is very precarious right now. And so, as much as ubiquitous as coffee is, that might not continue in terms of considering all the pressures on the industry. And I highly respect the people in the industry because they are adapting and moving and innovating to keep the industry going. Second most popular traded commodity after petroleum is coffee.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I
there's
did not
more.
know that.
Yeah, there's more variety. People talk about terroir and wine and this and that, and I like wine and I respect that industry, but there's more varietals of coffee than there are of wine. this beverage that is so common is very, very complex, and its history is also, I mean, it's a tricky history because there's like parallel histories of coffee and colonialism and slavery. You know, those are they are going hand in hand. There's a reason we're growing coffee in certain parts of the world that are former colonies, former places where they had slave labor and things like that. So it's a, I mean, you could say it's a problematic history. I certainly would agree with that. I see it more as like a sticky history, that you can't just celebrate coffee and not talk about its history. You know,
Yeah, I
you
can
have to.
understand that.
Yeah, it doesn't mean, and I don't want this series to be like a downer, like, oh, you drink coffee, you're bad. But it's not that at all. I mean, let's be realistic. You know,
Yeah.
so many people love coffee, and there's nothing wrong with knowing a little bit more about the history and how we got to where we are in terms of our relationship with
Yeah,
coffee.
it's better to understand the past, so obviously it's never repeated, and that we know the wrongdoings that were done then.
Exactly. Exactly.
Also, you gotta wonder. It makes a lot of sense because when you look at the history of coffee, it's kind of like the history of spices for Europe. They went to try and colonialize parts of Asia. They ended up finding spices. They didn't end up colonizing a lot of it, but they ended up getting a commodity like that that doesn't grow there. So it makes a lot of sense. So I did want to ask if you guys were gonna dive into it, all the chemical, how it works in the brain, and the doing like the chemicals with inside coffee, and kind of the not addictiveness of it, but it is somewhat of an addiction. Say you don't have your coffee and you drink coffee every day, you get a headache at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I fortunately, I don't think I drink enough coffee. That hasn't happened, but I've heard of that. I mean, I know people there's like, oh my gosh, I have a splitting headache. I missed my morning coffee.
That would be me.
Like, oh my God, so sorry. Let me go get you a cup of coffee. You feel better. No, no, no. It's after 4. I can't drink after 4. You think all night. I'm like, oh wow. Maybe you should rethink your.
Well, it's an interesting side effect to this thing that seemingly everyone drinks every day.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think the science of, so that the episode of the science of coffee will certainly go into that. I think in the pilot episode we talk a little bit about the science. I think it's like the third chapter in the pilot episode. But I don't think we'll go that deep into like the kind of the effects that caffeine have on the body, on the brain, and people's kind of grown dependency on that. That would come up more in the series where we can devote an entire episode to exploring. And again, I like to use this word, celebrating, like the science of coffee and the complexity of it, and things like that, and how it affects the human body. And but then I know other people too. I know a guy in his 70s. He has a cup of coffee and he goes to bed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have like a glass of water and I go to bed. He has a cup of coffee and goes to bed, sleeps like a baby. So it doesn't affect everybody the same way.
No,
And of
yeah.
course, over time.
Yeah, there's a variety of effects it has for people. It's super interesting, and that would be so interesting to dive into if you really think about it. Because I know it's few and far between you get people like that, but I have friends that do that too. Like, we'll be up at, because I also stream video games, so it's kind of interesting. We have one buddy that drinks coffee while we play video games at 2 in the morning, and goes to bed after, and it's just like, okay. But
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it's fascinating. And I think it, again, like I said before, we're looking at a lot of issues through the lens of coffee, because we're going to be learning a lot about coffee, but we're going to be learning just as much about, like, history and science, and kind of the socialization of coffee, kind of the role coffee plays in people's kind of daily routines and getting people together. And you meet somebody, say, hey, let's get together for a coffee, or you're interested in somebody and you're not going to ask for a date, but you might say, hey, well, let's grab a coffee sometime. Like, why coffee? What is it about coffee that makes it this kind of, I wouldn't say neutral, but it's kind of this, well, if you're meeting for coffee, it can't be that serious, right?
yeah,
Casual. if you're like, oh, you need to come to my office right now, we got to talk. Okay, that sounds serious. But if it's, hey, we got to meet for coffee sometime, it's like, well, okay,
Yeah,
it's easy going. How
we're
did that
sorting
happen?
out a plan, like or like an idea. I feel like a lot of production meetings or things along that spectrum, where it's more of a low class, like a low cost situation, and it's something cheap that people can kind of come to, and one person can buy it, and it's a few dollars.
Yeah,
The It makes it a casual conversation. There's nothing high stakes about it. Um, but that kind of leans into what we were talking about before the podcast when you were talking about how culture is affected by coffee. And I made the comment that it's kind of like the great, I don't know, not unifier, but unifier between being the most traded, one of the most traded goods,
mm,
and how everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people drink coffee and
yeah,
have passion for coffee. Like we have people from all different backgrounds and um, idea pools that come and see that they can all appreciate coffee together in different ways.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really, I mean, my graduate work is in cultural anthropology, so this series is very, anthropological in that sense, or infused with that kind of, understanding of uh, how societies work and cultural rituals work and things like that, and what role is coffee playing in these things. And in some of the best coffee in the world, like I said, is in Japan. I mean, most people would think, oh, Japanese drink tea. Yes, they do, but they also drink a lot of coffee. And like the real high end stuff tends to get bought by the Japanese. There's more roasteries per capita in South Korea than I think anywhere else in the world. It's Europe, it's the Middle East, it's Africa, it's Central America, Asia, North America, uh, and so it is really consumed all over the world. But then you can also find these interesting situations. When I was in Ethiopia a number of years back, which is essentially the birthplace of coffee, um, there's lots of coffee being, farmed and processed and shipped. And you get up in the morning and you go down to the cafe and they serve you a cup of tea. I mean, you can get coffee in Ethiopia, but it wasn't the go-to beverage in the morning for most people when I was there. It's
Really?
tea. Yeah.
That's super interesting. And I think that's also very interesting that it's like the biggest in Japan because you think about the problem with going on with the coffee industry with farmers being older and such. Japan's one of the countries that's seeing a population decline bigger than
Mm.
anyone else in the world because they have a smaller youth population than ever before.
Yeah.
It's kind
Yeah.
of paralleled in that sense of, oh, this is the place that loves coffee the most is also the place that is declining in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating, and I can't speak to like African and Asian farming, but that I do know about like the Central American situation, and I don't imagine it's much different in Africa and Asia either. Um, and so that's that's like a key issue. I mean, like I said, if you don't have people to pick the fruit, pick the crop, you have no crop, right? But some ways in which that can be solved or remedied is that, oh, well, destitute migrants from other countries come and pick the coffee. But then are they being treated well in terms of wages, in terms of housing, in terms of school for their kids? So, it's a big issue. It needs to be addressed, and more people need to be aware of these things. Not to say that people have been sticking their heads in the sand. It's just, people don't
I
know about
mean,
it. And yeah, part of the reason is that again, coffee is so common, it's as if it just happens, and it does.
yeah.
It
Well,
doesn't. There's a lot that goes into it.
you can look at that in many different industries. I mean, look at phones and things like that. You Not all practices that bring our phones to our hands are very ethical as they might be perceived to be. I mean, if you've ever seen the stuff about the cobalt mines and where is it? It's somewhere in Africa. I don't want to misname it. I want to say it's the Congo, but I could be wrong. Um,
Yeah, I'm
but
not sure, and it's yeah, we don't want to know
no, you
what
really
all
don't.
it is, and and we should know. We should
Yeah,
know, because then we can just, are we going to stop using cell phones? No, but can we make smarter purchasing choices?
exactly. Well, there's like electric cars and things like that that are working on using lithium ion batteries that don't have cobalt in them because of the ethical issues with the things going on at these mines. So my question lies in that: what is it like for these coffee bean farm or coffee fruit farmers? What are their living conditions like, and are they making much money, or is it kind of the typical farmer's life for them?
Yeah. So I have not gone to a coffee growing region just yet. The harvesting was in mid-January. I was planning on going to Costa Rica, so I can't speak from a firsthand position here. But from people I've spoken to in the industry, there really is quite a range, Jimmy. There's situations where the coffee company or the exporter and the importer are helping like build schools and like making sure there's running water, and there's good living conditions in and around these farms for the people who work on the farms. And then there's situations where it's rather poor conditions, and the people are well, this is one thing that I think applies to most coffee growing regions. They are grossly underpaid. I was talking to somebody in the industry the other day. They said, people complain about $3, $4 a coffee. We should be paying $8 or $9 for a cup of coffee, but the industry knows, well, there would be a massive backlash, right? But in terms of like ethical, kind of reciprocation for these people's labor and what it costs to get, this one cup made. I mean, that's something we might see in terms of the future of coffee. We may very well see the prices go up as a means of providing better wages for the people who work on these farms. And I personally think it's just a matter of time. I mean, everything's been going up since the pandemic anyway. People bitch and moan about gasoline. Okay, fine, whatever. But haven't you noticed that everything is going up? And I don't think it's any one person's problem, but it's almost like the northern hemisphere I hope comes to this realization that all these conveniences that I wouldn't say we get them relatively cheaply, because
No, we do. We
but
do.
okay, so we do relatively. They seem cheap. It's about time we started paying what it really costs for these things. It
Yeah.
just can't sustain such low prices for these modern conveniences.
Agreed. And we do get them. We get them at exorbitantly cheap rates comparative to what the labor and everything should
Yeah.
be. But that also kind of goes to the point of we are a very internationally driven economy. So
Yeah.
when you bring that aspect in that we moved a lot of our labor and things overseas, we get all these different side effects of that. Yeah, we're able to get stuff for cheap, but the reason we can get it for cheap is we're paying people way under what they're supposed to be being paid. And not to mention the way we ship stuff here isn't 100% ethical if you look at the amount of fuel we use and the amount of plastic that gets used. If you talk to anyone in logistics about switching to glass and um, things other than plastics, they'll tell you you're insane.
Yeah.
So, in the aspect of bringing some stuff home, it might be smart. It might not make sense in the coffee industry, obviously, but in other aspects, I think we've reached that realization as a society at this point where we can start bringing stuff home and bring jobs home to some of our people and making it more ethical can see where we can kind of maintain that because we don't have control over that in other countries.
Yeah, so true. And oh, come on. There's plenty of communities in the United States that could use that kind of economic boost by, having more labor, jobs available to them. I mean, I live out in the Northeast now, and I drive through upstate New York, and man, I mean, these communities need a boost. And I've
Absolutely.
heard the same for like the Rust Belt and things like that. And just to also bring it back to coffee to some extent, and I love Hawaii, and I love people in the Hawaiian coffee growing industry. So I hope they don't get upset with me. But one of the reasons Kona Coffee, which is basically in the United States, we grow coffee. Well, Puerto Rico territory, Hawaii, and there's a little bit being grown in California, but that's kind of a new thing. But the American coffee is pretty much Kona coffee from Hawaii. The reason it costs so much, because we're paying Americans to pick those cherries. That's why Kona costs so much. And the cost of Kona makes most people think, oh, it must be really good. No, it's just that that's coffee growing in the United States and they're being paid a decent wage. That's why Kona costs so much. So if we're willing to pay that much for Kona coffee, for coffee picked by Americans, well, are we not willing to pay that much for coffee grown elsewhere?
Well,
I mean, if we adopt a kind of global awareness in terms of the economy and things like that.
I agree that that should be how it is. If we're gonna think of it logistically in the sense of how, I'm trying not to make this too political, but if you look at how some areas are handled when we give money to certain entities outside of our boundaries of a country, it never seems to make it to the actual workers. And the fact is that we don't really have a say in that. And I don't think, when I was thinking earlier when you were talking about it, I was like, oh, why doesn't a corporation just hop in there and kind of almost build a town and make it a very nice, sustainable life to boost the coffee farmers? But are they going to be, is a corporation going to be willing to pay all that extra money to make their product more expensive? I can't be the say of that. And I don't think
Yeah.
anyone other than the corporation or said entity can do that.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that's a good point, Jimmy. And if they do, will we still buy their product?
exactly.
It's it's kind of like they all start doing it or nobody does it. Because the one company that does do it, they'll have some devoted, customers who are like, yeah, yes, this is the right kind of coffee to be drinking, and this is what I'll buy. But let's be honest, in terms of like the world consumption, people just go to the other companies that aren't doing it because they can get their cup of coffee cheaper. So, I mean, making a series like this, one thing you asked me earlier, how did this idea come about? A lot of these issues were things I've been, as many other people have been kind of toying with, like as we're, becoming more and more of a globalized, world, realizing how interconnected so many different cultures and societies and economies are, and just like, how sustainable is this? I mean, at what point will this things just not be available anymore? And unless we do something about it, I think stuff can be made available if we're, if we're willing to pay a little more for, like we said, these kind of modern conveniences. And I do think of coffee as, it's not even a convenience. I think it's a luxury. It really is. It's so common that, but I don't think we think about it as a luxury, but it is. It's a luxury beverage. And it, as we learned from the pandemic, luxuries aren't always there.
No, I think that's a very good point too. When you really think about it, there's a lot of things in at least Western culture that aren't really appreciated. And I talked to a friend of mine, Alex Rubio, about he started kind of farming on his own just for his own. So he has, what are they called? It's a bird that's like chick quails. He
Okay.
raises quails now, and he talked about the process of culling quails because you harvest them for their meat after a certain point, and how much respect he has for the meat that he gets from that. He doesn't throw any of that away. And I think that's another thing that with factory farming, it's kind of the same thing. We don't really appreciate it, and that's a commodity that we do need, but it is a luxury that we're able to eat as much meat as Americans eat.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's all the health issues that go with it too. So, and that's, to me, that brings it from like global kind of, environmental scale, but then down to a very personal level of like, oh, there's a lot of health problems that come with that. So yeah, it affects the planet. I shouldn't say so flippantly. Yeah, it affects the planet. But I think to get people to pay attention and really start thinking seriously about this, there's those who'll be, rah, yes, it's the right thing to do. But I think for most people, until it affects them, they don't really want to be bothered.
Absolutely.
And so you start talking about the massive amount of meat consumption, particularly bovine meat in North America. Talk about it as a health issue. Talk about it as an environmental and a health issue. And I think you're going to get people paying a little bit more attention, especially if they think it's something that could very well affect them because they're
Absolutely. I mean, well, you look at the cancer rates in the U.S., it's very much tied to what we do to our food. And it could even be due to how do they treat X product, if it's coffee or this or that. We do a lot
yeah
of different things to our food that a lot of other countries don't allow.
yeah
The reason I bring all this up and the stuff outside of coffee is because the problem you're explaining is kind of across industries, and puts us in a certain situation, realizing that this isn't just coffee. This is a very important story about coffee, but we got to realize this is happening in almost every other industry too, where in the lens of that I'm a little bit more versed in than coffee is when you talk about the farming and stuff. That's why I brought that up. If we were to just have smaller farms rather than one giant farm, there's a lot more ethics based in like, oh, if everyone has chickens, everyone has eggs. And if there's a big farmer down the street in our local area that farm grazes the bovine that he's raising, that's a lot healthier for everyone too. We're not doing as much to the meat. Um, and people are getting things more sustainably, and it's kind of also rebuilding the amount of land that we're kind of destroying with factory farming.
yeah. Well,
So if
we
we
talked about that.
diversify,
We talked about that in the class that you took at UMass, possible futures, and just when you step back and really look at, like, particularly the cattle, industrial livestock industry, the amount of land devoted to raising cattle, to growing the corn to feed the cattle, the water they consume, the water they pollute. I mean, it's overwhelming, right?
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
We have a lot of big and interesting issues in our culture today. I think we just have to ask the right questions on how to fix them. And I
Mm.
think it's really cool that you guys are doing this series. And I think you guys had the ability to ask very important questions that could be posed to the American public, that could help us deal with a lot more issues than just coffee.
Yeah, I would hope so, Jimmy. I mean, I think in my mind, any good piece of filmmaking, isn't just about that one particular issue, but it gets the audience to think about other things as well. And if we can do that with this film and with this series, then I'll be very happy.
I think
Because
it'll
yeah,
be
it is the future of coffee, but we're not just talking about coffee.
absolutely. And I think that's really cool, and that's also something people that aren't film scholars, some realize, some don't, and kind of bringing that to the forefront is one of my favorite things about talking about film. Honestly,
Yeah. Did you watch the Academy Awards last night?
I did not. I was working, but I won't get into my work. But how did that go? Did you? I'm assuming you got to watch it.
Yeah, I put $5 in a pool, and everybody filled out a ballot, and I did okay. I didn't win.
Sounds like
I
March
didn't win.
Madness.
Yeah, I know. I'm like the film guy in the house, and I didn't win. And this year, I really tried. It's funny. Whenever I do, I vote for who I want, and like, if you want to win the pool, you don't vote for who you want. You vote for who you think will win. But
Absolutely.
this year I did. I voted for who I thought would win, and I was really happy that I voted for Austin Butler, even though I wasn't particularly crazy about the Elvis film, but I thought he did a good job, and I kind of thought, oh, he's going to win. But Brendan Fraser won. I was so happy for him.
Okay.
Disappeared for a while for some very troubling reasons, and he's back, gets Academy Award. That's great. And All Quiet on the Western Front, that won a lot more than I thought it would, even though I thought it was a good film, but it really, really did well. So yeah, it was fun. I mean,
That's so
growing up,
cool.
Yeah, growing up, the Academy Awards were kind of like the Super Bowl in my house. And my mom would make a special dinner, and we'd like, it was like a big deal because my parents just love movies, and they got obviously that influenced me from a young age as well. So sitting down and watching the Academy Awards is now I do it with my family, and we have a blast.
That's awesome. I've never even thought of it being kind of like a Super Bowl type deal, but that's so cool. Like it's interesting how that's another thing that kind of parallels to a different area that never would have thought of if you didn't tell me about that.
Yeah,
Um,
and I do think it's entertaining and it's fun, but it says something about where America is at. Like who's being awarded for what kind of performances in what kind of films, telling what kind of stories. I mean, it's a little bit of a metric in terms of where the nation is at in terms of our tastes in terms of entertainment, and I find that very interesting.
yeah, and when you really think down to it, in our forms of entertainment, you can look at it and see where are we at intellectually,
Yeah,
because at least from what you guys have taught me through my studies at UMass, film isn't just a piece of entertainment. What makes it art is its commentary on society. And so that's why I love Black Mirror so much, is that every single one of those episodes is this visceral piece of art that we don't see, or it's harder to see in the aspect of like superhero movies or uh, more mainstream films.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think Black Mirror is such a good episode. And every episode I see a little bit of a world that already exists. And I think that's the brilliance. Like it's sci-fi in the sense of like kind of alternative world building sci-fi. Again, not like talking raccoons kind of fantasy
Yeah.
stuff. You watch an episode and you go, oh, that wow, that stuff like that kind of already exists, or those kind of issues are already kind of bubbling up to the surface in society. And then that series takes those issues further and explores, well, what if this was real? What if this kind of dating app actually did exist? What if this was considered a legal form of criminal justice? The episode White Bear, that
Hmm.
just is one of the most, it's so good and one of the most troubling episodes I've seen. So yeah, I see a little bit of the world we already live in when I watch the Black Mirror episodes. It's fascinating.
Yeah, especially I think the most visceral. That's one of the most visceral episodes because remind me if I'm not correct here. That's the one with the woman's trying to get to the radio tower. They wipe her mind, and she's just running through, and all these people are chasing her with like cameras and such.
Which is it's so commonplace, yet
Mm-hmm.
so disturbing within the context of that episode. And yeah, that notion of like perennial punishment. Like, I mean, she did a horrible thing, absolutely. But kind of like it makes me think of the book The Road, where like how far are we willing to go to like survive or to punish people? And is there a point where we start to lose our own humanity?
I think
That like,
that's an amazing question
yeah,
because I think there's an area in society where we're kind of lacking that I think people are starting to kind of wake up to, where we and see it's why we are so divided when it comes to politics and stuff. We lack the knowledge that we're all human and that humans change, and I'm not going to be the same person I was yesterday.
yeah.
Oh,
Well, Jimmy, you're touching on something that I think is extremely problematic. I think there's a fair amount of people there who would not recognize that humans change.
well, yeah,
You know,
that's
or they really adamantly resist that because change somehow is interpreted as weakness or instability, not as growth, not as advancement, not as building from what you knew the day before into making your next day even better or more secure or whatever.
Well,
I was thinking
changes.
about, I don't want to get too political, and it's your
Mhm.
show. Let me know if I cross the line. But I thought about this the other day, and of course, there's the, all the things that went down on January 6th, and I do think that's a day that needs to be acknowledged every year. But I was thinking about that slogan, "Hang Mike Pence." I mean, I am no fan of Mike Pence, but that is so extreme. That is so extreme. And even putting a noose up, I mean, there's a lot of crazies all over the place, but that was just such a concentration of the crazies that to be yelling this slogan, "Hang Mike Pence," the duly elected vice president of the United States, like him or not. I mean, that put me in tears to think that that many people would go around screaming, for the murder of an
Well,
elected official.
yes.
That's horrible.
Yeah, it is terrible. And actually, that's a very interesting issue at the moment that's kind of arose. So a lot, and I can't believe either side when it comes to this. In terms of, I try and look at the middle of the ground because I think we're only getting a handful of facts from each side that's reporting on this. But a lot of video has recently come out of the actual 40,000 hours that they have of the video of January 6th. And so
Mhm.
right now, conservative media is pushing that um, it wasn't what it was perceived to be completely, which I know it sounds outlandish, but being someone in film and media, the ability you have to develop a story by cutting together film. So I think
Yeah.
it's more of a middle ground of, I don't think it was as insane as the liberal media made it because that was a very good playing card to have. But I don't think it was as tone deaf as conservative media is placing it to be after this video has come out. So I think it's somewhere in this middle ground where people entered the Capitol and there's a lot of things that have happened. But I think we're at this kind of tipping point of like, who can we look for the facts? What actually happened that day? Because I don't think anyone actually knows that isn't someone high up that's making the decisions. And I know that sounds conspiracy theory and like I have a tinfoil hat on, but when you really look into it, why is there this complete polar story from this event that absolutely was terrible, but is it really what we think it was on either end?
That's an excellent question. An
Um,
excellent question.
so I
Yeah,
just
I
I thought that was
don't.
intensely interesting.
Yeah, and you're kind of getting into an issue of yes, you can piece news footage together. I mean, I'm not going to refute what you just said because I totally understand where you're coming from. I mean, I watched it live on
Mm-hmm.
TV. I saw the president come out and say that he loves these people, that they're beautiful, and now it's time to go home. He loves them and they're beautiful. Now maybe he didn't know what all was going on in the Capitol.
I mean, let's be honest here. He probably knew, I'm not explaining for the people that were there doing what they were doing because I get the peaceful protest part of it, but I don't. A lot of that was not peaceful, so I'm not.
When a Capitol police officer points a gun at
Yeah,
the woman who died, points a gun at a woman and shoots her dead, I tend to believe there would be good reason for that.
absolutely.
Um,
That's
I
what
mean,
I'm
just like,
saying. Like, what do we believe here? And is it is it so much that because there was obviously a terrible side to this day, and I agree,
yeah.
and it just is so interesting. I don't know. It's such a complex issue in terms of how much. Like, I get that there was that story. It's just, was it played like not those instances during the day, but like was all of it as massive as it seemed, or was it like this front group that was pushing into the Capitol that was making the big issue, whereas like
Yeah.
a few hundred people back, they're just there for the peaceful protest. So I don't
Yeah.
know, and it goes to the same thing when you look at some of the BLM stuff. Conservative media did the same thing, where the you see the same kind of play. It focuses on all the bad things, saying they're rioting when it was really just like, I don't know, like 20, 30 people that were there to be anarchists. You see it on
Yeah.
both sides. So I just,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
makes it hard to know what exactly to believe on which side is saying. That's kind of my
I think
point.
I agree, and and I think everybody's aware that, like, well, you can edit something in a certain way, but even if that's not the case, and I'm certainly not sympathetic to former President Donald Trump, but when he slipped on the ramp, do you remember that when I was president? I think he
I
was
think
getting
so.
off Air Force One or something.
I think so.
CNN played that clip all day. It's like, come on. Like, he slipped on the ramp. Let's move on. No. So it sometimes it's not just a matter of, oh, that video has been tweaked. It's just the over amplification of something. You show the same footage over and over and over. And it starts to make things seem bigger than maybe they were. So I mean, I recall that particularly on that day with like I heard, oh, somebody said, oh, Donald Trump slipped on the ramp getting off Air Force One. I'm like, oh yeah, of
Whatever.
course he
Yeah.
did. But then, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, still on CNN. 9 o'clock at night, they're still talking about. It's like
It's
it's just
wild.
it's humorous. Like, really, like you're a news organization, and and I mean, Fox does the
Exact same.
same thing, if more as well. But I think it's always good to I mean,
Look at both
I
sides.
consider myself a liberal person, but a liberal in the sense of I'm open. One of my cherished comments I got from a former student while I was teaching at Clark. He came up to me at the end of the semester, and he said, "Hey, I just want to let you know I really liked your class. I come from a very conservative household. One of the few conservatives on campus, and your class is one of the few places I feel I can speak my mind." And I said, "Thank you for telling me that, because that to me is a true liberal, somebody who's open to hearing multiple opinions. I mean, not the crazy wacko QAnon stuff. That stuff, it can reach a limit, right? But in terms of like
Absolutely.
an educational environment where it's like, okay, let's discuss this. Let's not yell at each other. Let's discuss it. And I think that's missing from higher education. I have a number of friends who are pretty conservative, very conservative. And they're always coming down on me. Oh, did you hear higher ed is against, conservative values, and, there's all this tyranny in higher ed. They're not allowing multiple opinions of things. And I think there are instances like that, but in general, higher ed is a very open environment. But I do think that's one thing we're missing from the student body when we talk about diversity in college campuses. Where's the diversity in terms of political opinion? Because I don't see it where I'm at.
Yeah, so I think I have a little bit of an answer
Yeah.
to that issue, and I don't think it's that there isn't a diversity in that. I feel that in your class, this is something I commend you being one of my professors as, like, in your class, I felt very safe in expressing any idea that I share that same opinion that your former student had.
Good to hear.
Because that is the most important part, is humanizing everyone and talking to people. But over the past, it was around when I was in college. I can't speak for the environment now, but there was a very aggressive sense of, if you expressed any, and this wasn't in your class, this was in, I saw it in other classes plenty though. If you express conservative values in any way, shape, or form, you were immediately a bigot. You were immediately, and there's this like hard lashback to that. So we don't see people with conservative values in colleges for the most part speaking up because they don't want to get torn apart for having an opinion.
Yeah, that is an absolute shame. It really is. And I think maybe we do need to work harder in higher ed to,
Well,
allow, well, not to jump around too much, but I
mm,
remember, what's his name? Spicer. He was like the press guy for Donald. Like he went through so many
yes,
cap,
yes,
but he was coming to UMass. Sean Spicer came to UMass, and I think he was brought by like the campus Republicans or something like that. And there was no notification about that at all in the communication department. We're a department of communication. The president's press advisor is coming to campus. That should be something that should be,
big
you
news.
know, big news. It should be, I mean, you don't have to go, but it should at least be advertised all over campus. And it wasn't. And I was like, that's just such a shame. So I'm sure a lot of people would have liked to have gone and given him a piece of their mind. If
Absolutely.
just that, just to go and hear this guy, what would it have been like to work for Donald Trump and like probably, you know, disagree with most of what he was asking you to do, but you're doing it anyway. I mean, I think it would have been a fascinating. I would have gone had I known.
Absolutely. Well,
Um,
I think we're in this
what was that?
environment, though. You know,
Yeah,
It- it's
yeah,
it's not even that it's what I think the effect. So you know the mean world theory, correct?
yeah,
So I think for those that don't know, it's pretty much when you consume a certain form of information that for video games, for instance, you play too many violent video games, people think, oh, you're going to go do something terrible to other people. In reality, the effects of that lead to the mean world theory, where if I consume enough violent video games, I'm not going to go do that. It's more likely that I'm going to be afraid of violence happening to me. So it's going to make me more scared of the world. Ergo, that's the so and so of it. But I think we're seeing this effect of with this news cycle where, like you said, Donald Trump fell down the stairs or something, like, and it's played over and over again, and we just and we play on this fact that, oh, the other side is so silly, or they're crazy, or they're this and they're that, and when you hear that over and over again, you get to the sense of like we just dehumanize the other side. Where if we can have compassion and maybe we won't agree with what we're being told by the other side, but we can kind of see where they're coming from.
yeah,
And that's like when you can humanize the other side, you want to do right by them because you want to be a human and
that's,
be compassionate. So we
yeah,
gotta we gotta teach people to be more compassionate and understand each other, because so we can make compromise and actually make movement. But there's these all these different pushing effects right now that we are in a tipping point where I think we're starting to see people humanize people more, but we really
yeah,
gotta put down our cards and like really show that we want to love each other and make this place better, you know?
yeah. I fully agree. Fully agree, Jimmy. I'll just one more thing I put in on that subject is I took a trip to the Outer Banks of North Carolina 2 summers ago. I wanted to go there for a number of years, see Kitty Hawk and all that. And I'm at the hotel, and it's hotter than blazes. So like I'm in the pool, I'm cooling off, and there's another guy. It's just kind of I'm not swimming, I'm just kind of sitting in the pool, staying cool. And we start talking, and he's a little bit older than me, and blah 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 blah. And it comes out, he's like, oh, he's a sheriff in a county in South Carolina. And he says, well, that's what I do. What do you do? I said, I'm a professor at the University of Massachusetts. And he kind of like stops and he goes, so would you be one of them liberals? And I leaned in, I
Oh,
go, absolutely. And he and I continued to talk for another hour or so in the pool about all kinds of stuff, a little bit on politics, a little bit on social issues, but just in general, just talking, enjoying, cooling off, in the pool. We got along like a house on fire. It was great. We were laughing. And I walked away from that, and I hope he did too, realizing people in this country have more in common than we don't have in common. Okay. I mean, if a professor at the University of Massachusetts and a sheriff from South Carolina can enjoy the afternoon together and just have fun and relax and kind of identify with each other, see the human inside each other, well then, yeah. I mean, that's where we're at. That trip definitely really opened my eyes to like we have way more in common than we don't have in common. And I think that needs to be spread throughout the United States because Putin and all those jerks, that all this divisiveness in the country. Some people love that, mostly our foreign enemies.
Absolutely. I love
You
that
know?
story. And it really just goes to show, like, that's something, even pushing on different issues that we have in our country, where the way you message it is everything. And if we can't learn to accept others, even if they have cultural differences or they have differing opinions, like, we're all just humans, man. Like, we can get along. We should be trying to, the golden rule, right?
Yeah.
You just
And know our
practice it.
American history. This country, just so many different cultures and ethnicities and political opinions. And when the going got rough, everybody's like, okay, let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
Do this. And not that there's always been harmony in the United States, my God, far from it. But that's one of the things that has helped build this country. And some terrible things have helped build the country too, like slave labor
Mm-hmm.
and taking over. I don't want to ignore all that, but let's also identify what has made America such a good nation. That's that diversity of people and opinions coming together when need be, and as you said, recognizing the humanity in our neighbor, and
Absolutely.
move forward from there.
Yeah, and I think it's important to state that, like, people do change. We're changing every day, and I think the thought of people not changing every day and becoming better limits us. We won't dive into it, but the prison industrial complex is a whole thing, but we really, if we accept that people change, we can accept our past and not be sad. It was terrible. We did a lot of terrible things as a country. But if we can accept that people change, we can accept the wrongdoings that we did and learn from them and make a positive out of a negative. And if we
Yeah,
can do that with people, we can do it with the lineage of our country.
yeah, we need to. We definitely need to, Jim.
Yeah.
That's really well put.
But speaking of big events that have kind of unified us, COVID didn't really unify us, I don't think. I think it kind of threw a ball into uh, a interesting situation. But how did that really affect you when you were teaching? I know I was there for the beginning and the tail end of my college career in this, but what were, like, some of the hurdles that you had to go through, and how has it kind of evolved, I guess?
Yeah, I'm so glad to be back in the classroom. I'm so glad. And I really felt for, for all of you. You were just about out the door. So you had like 3 months of online learning, and that's too bad. That's not a great way to close out your college career. But I really feel for like the first years coming in, and like when they're getting all their education via computer screen, I felt for them, but also I saw some of the effects of that going in to the transition of being in the classroom. And and I think it's a result of having started their college education online, because the attendance is really low. I think there's a lot of people who have it in their head that attendance is, I mean, yes, attendance is optional, but if you want to learn in this class, you go to class. But I think a lot of people, I get requests like, oh, are the lectures online? Are the lectures recorded? Do I have to go? And I'm like, no, you don't have to go, but you'll learn more if you come. And no, I don't record my lectures because I teach this class in person. It's not bimodal. I'm not doing it online and in person. Some people were doing that. So again, I don't want to come across as really blaming those particular college students, because that was their initial introduction to what college was. Even if they knew, like, when their parents went to college, it was in person. Their experience at college was online. And so it's been hard for them, and for some of them, and hard for us as educators to work through that and be like, no, let's let go of that notion that attendance is optional. Let's go of that notion that your education can just be done online. And essentially what that means is at your convenience. Okay. The university goes out of its way very much to try to make people's education as convenient as possible. No, major in whatever you want, and if you want to do this, and I think there's positive attributes to that, but there is something important about saying this is what this class is asking of you, and you meet that or you don't. And there's no like, oh well, can I get no, like this is what I'm asking of you to do, and if you need a little extra time on an assignment, okay, once. But there's a lot of expectation of like really customizing the college student's education. And again, I think that is really the result of having maybe finished high school online and started college online. And it's just as they're growing and maturing, I think a lot of students had it, hopefully it's in the past, but I think some still do, in their head that, they will customize their education. And that's been a problem. That's been very difficult to work with.
That's interesting. That's not something I would have foreseen happening.
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting aspect to it. So I'm trying to think now because I was gonna kind of try and go off that, but is that one of the like kind of defining issues you've seen? Because that's a pretty big issue, especially in classes like yours where discussion is where I really learned the bulk of what I was learning. Like you did an amazing job like lecturing, but the discussions we had really solidified whatever we were trying to learn that day in my mind.
Oh, that's then okay. That's good to hear, because then, if the discussion is good, then I think it means the lecture was good. And so, yeah, then I do feel that when we are talking openly as a group in a classroom, it's a great kind of environment for people to learn, change, grow, alter their thoughts on things, learn from others. That's really important. And I hope for some people who still think they can just have their education any way they want it, that they will come around to this. And again, I'd say the majority of the students have come around, definitely. And they're so glad to be in the classroom and they're glad to be discussing stuff. But there's just a bigger percentage than I would really like that still seems to be like, oh well, I'll do this class at my own convenience. And it's like, well, like I said, and I say this, especially in those large lecture classes, I neither reward nor penalize attendance. Okay. You don't get points for coming to class in those big classes. If you come, you're going to learn more. And if you don't come, you won't learn as much. And that's on the student.
That's a good way to think about it, I think. Just due to it will aid them in their career going forward to learn to be present for things.
Yeah.
I think that just has like, if it's a very large percentage, that would kind of worry me. If that's across all universities, that we might have an issue in the upcoming workforce in a few years. Because at different jobs, a lot of jobs are not going back to the office. However, a good deal are. So that poses. Sorry, you kind of got me in a thinking loop here. I got a lot to think about now in terms of, oh, maybe that's something we can help fix by talking about it. But I got to pose the right questions. I need time to kind of figure that out.
Well, I think even with the growing online workforce, and there's that, and hey, a bit of I have to show up to lecture, but when I'm writing my lectures, I can be at home, I can be in a cafe, I can be in my office. I mean, I like that versatility. I like that. But there's such thing as deadlines. And so while there may be people who are leaving college and then going into the workforce and working maybe their own hours from their own domestic space, the boss still needs things done at a certain time. And coinciding with that kind of customizing my education problem is this perceived flexibility of deadlines. And that just doesn't fly in the working world.
Absolutely.
It doesn't. You might be able to do the work on your own hours, but come Tuesday at noon, If that isn't done, that's a problem.
Absolutely. Especially if you're a contractor or,
Yeah.
because that's your livelihood if you're not done for a client. Say you're
Oh,
a
yeah.
photographer or you're someone
Yeah.
coming out of the comms department, but you're running your own business. That's your livelihood. And if you don't know how to meet those expectations of clients, you're going to be downstream without a paddle.
Absolutely. You just want, like, it could happen once, but it's not like three strikes you're out. Like two strikes, that client is not going to want to work with you again. Your boss is going to give you a serious talking to. You're going to lose customers, things like that. Yeah, I mean, meeting people's expectations is huge in any work environment, whether it's creative or scientific or whatever it is you're doing. It's like, oh, you know what I need? I need this, and I need it on this day, and then that day comes, and you give that person that, and they're like, awesome, that's great. Okay, I've got more for you to do now. If it's like, oh, I'm still waiting for that, they're not. You're not going to get called back to do the work.
No, and that's a very interesting issue. What in terms of regulations going back to the classroom, how was that? Because I know it was very touch and go for about a year.
I there should be a mask nearby, but I'm happy to say I don't know where my masks are. Oh, dude, I hated that. I mean, not just like, okay, class, today we're gonna talk, and it's exhausting. Like, lecturing is, I mean, there's harder work out there, but like, I'm talking for like, a good hour or so, and you run out of breath when you're not getting as much oxygen in as you need. The lecture is that, but also the nonverbal cues when everybody's sitting in the audience like this or like this. Are they getting it?
Oh my
Am I
god.
pissing people off? Do they have questions? Because I can, like this, I can look at my class and somebody might go, okay, so what's up? Something I need to explain, or somebody might be like, oh, so I'm making sense. I can go on. It was just like everybody was like the bandit.
Oh
Like,
my god. You know, that's something I never really realized about lecturing. You're like a stand-up comic.
yeah, you take away all the nonverbal cues that for interaction with with the students, and I'm like, I think they get it. They should get it. I have no idea though because they're not express, or I can't see their expressions.
So did that lead to a lot of just different like, hey, are you guys getting this? Or like kind of having to verbalize it?
I started to feel like an elementary school teacher. Like,
Oh my
okay, class, can we move on now? Just want to make sure everybody understood that, but I had to do that because I didn't know.
that's so interesting. I'm just amazed because I never thought of lecturing as stand-up comedy, but that's exactly how comics work. They have to read the room, and that never occurred to me.
Yeah, I didn't. It was exhausting and unfulfilling at the same time. I mean, if I'm exhausted and it's fulfilling, that's worth it. But when I'm exhausted and it's unfulfilling, wow, I gotta think of something different to do.
Yeah, and it just kind of poses the question of like where you can see the light bulbs turn on people, I'm guessing, and just be like, oh, now it's there. And
Mm.
have you thought about the societal effects of how that kind of plays into the younger people in our society with kids that were born during the mass kind of era and everything? I think that's very interesting to kind of look at after seeing how it affected lecturing. Because are they going to
Yeah.
get those social cues, or are they going to give off those social cues that you're talking about?
Oh yeah, and that's something that's it's learned, and it's then it's then processed, and then it becomes habit or even unconscious behavior. That's a great question. I don't know. I'm sure there's probably child psychologists out there who've done work on that and kind of the socialization of young kids during during the pandemic and their ability to either read or express their own kind of nonverbal forms of communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Yeah,
Let me
just
know.
interesting question just kind of popped into my head. I did want to ask you one last question on the teaching during the pandemic or professing. I don't know. Do you call it teaching or yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, you're a professor. There's a difference, and I know that. But what was it like? Because I was there for some of this, but for the audience, I wasn't attending college during the pandemic. For your
Right.
film classes, what was it like on the online discussions for you when you were doing Zoom meetings talking about these films you had people watching? You know, some of those people definitely did not watch the film and this and that. Like, how big of a hurdle was that environment for you?
Yeah, that was very challenging. And again, like say with our class, the particular one, Possible Futures, it's a 3-hour class, and I lecture, we watch a film, and we discuss that film. I mean, that's just to me, that's just like a great package, right? But then when I'm teaching it online, I they've seen it or they've not seen it. I lecture about the film, and then we have a discussion, or to put it more accurately, we try to have a discussion. And you know, thank goodness for those students who are like just zippity doo dah, like, oh yep, yep, I want to talk about Never Let Me Go, or I want to talk about Blade Runner, or I want to talk about the environment and Okja and stuff like that. That's great, but there were just so many that were like this. Wouldn't turn their cameras on, wouldn't say a word, wouldn't comment. And you can only do so much. And I would say things like, oh, Jessica, okay, thank you for turning your camera on while you're asking this question. I really appreciate that. Okay, go ahead. What's your question? So I try to acknowledge, like, I'm not going to tell everybody you have to turn your camera on. But I'm going to, for those who do have their cameras on and are contributing, really make it known, like, oh, hey, Dennis, great question. Thank you so much for that. So I was doing that. Even more challenging, and this was kind of nutso, as I taught an online version of a hands-on production course where there was no hands-on teaching, because I'm here in my house, they're there, and I'm saying, well, if you look at the camera, there's a button here, and you can turn off the autofocus. You want to use manual because control of what you want, all that. That was
Well, I was.
that was almost a joke.
Oh, I know.
Online videographic instruction. It was there, and the other challenge of that, just to round that out, was their ability. They couldn't get actors. They couldn't go anywhere. I got so many films turned in about being alone in my room. Well, like 30 of them.
It's suiting.
Which I had to work with.
Yeah, and unless you go into like the animation sphere and just have people record voices for you, animation's hard to get into to begin with. But let alone.
So it was particularly tough for the production course. It was just.
Well, I was in a similar situation, actually. I was a TA for the TV production class, the studio production. So I was actually running the meetings since I was the creative director, or not the creative director, really, and the set director for all the student work. We pretty much had full-on production meetings in lieu of having them do the production in the studio. Right. So it was a very interesting issue that we had to do. Yeah. And instead of making and actually doing the work, we just kind of did all the prelim work, which was
so tough. You guys need a person at all then for that class, 331, once the pandemic, like after spring break.
Yeah. We were what we were doing was we got with this program. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of the program, but it was, you set up the cameras, you labeled your shots. It was kind of like a previs program. Okay. And you set up your cameras, your lights, and you talked to me, the creative director, to kind of give you the lighting setup that you were going to work with and the look you were going for, and it kind of moved from there. And then you wrote a script kind of for questions for what you'd ask your guest, and then you went through this program and you programmed in the cuts for like, oh, this person says this, and I think there was like models and stuff you kind of just cut back and forth to, like gray models that is, it wasn't the same. When you're
No,
working with a whole TV crew, there's this magic in the air, I guess you could call it. When you're in
oh,
live TV production, it's a special space that you don't
I
really
love
get
that
in.
kind of familial environment created by a production, whether it's studio or on location. I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's kind of like learning how to drive via Zoom. It's like, well, I don't know if that person should ever get their license
No.
because it's gonna be very dangerous. You know, you have to get your hands dirty. You got to get on the equipment. You got to make mistakes. You got to learn. Oh, these lights are hot. Oh, that's out of focus. My tripod's not level. You have to do that. So, yeah, production during COVID was
Well,
lacking,
have you ever heard
to
the
say the least.
the term learning by burning?
No, but I like.
So I can't say where I work in the TV industry, but working in the TV industry, since you're live a lot of the time, you don't know how to put out fires when you're learning it. You know all of what you're supposed to do, but you're not going to know until you're in that high stress situation. So we call it learning by burning because you're not going to know how to handle a mess up. We call it something different, but I'm not going to deliberately
Yeah,
cuss like that. You're not going to know how to handle that certain mess up without being in that situation and then having to deal
yeah,
with that mess up. Because when you do mess
yeah,
up, everyone else is kind of pissed because you're screwing up the final product for everyone else, let alone that being lights or camera or this or that. You're all part of this machine, so everyone's just like, "What the fuck?" Or, you get what I mean.
yeah.
But
Trust any-
so you learn
yeah,
your experience by messing up on the job, and if you can't do that in a classroom where you're supposed to be learning that for an on-hands production class, you get the idea, but you haven't burned through the mess ups and the problems you need to put out the fires, and that's where you learn a lot of your job. You need to know that's what filmmaking is really just problem solving constantly.
yeah, yeah. You have to learn that, and that's one of the most important creative tools in filmmaking is your ability to adapt. And like, oh, the situation changes. Oh, it's raining today. It's not sunny. It's that location isn't available. That actor's sick today. What you have to move forward? What are you going to do? You asked for a yellow dress and they brought you a blue one. You're like, what are you going to do? So yeah, that adaptation, that learning to be creative, right on the spot in the moment is huge. It's huge. Yeah, I love that. Learning by burning. I'll have to remember that. I
Yeah.
like that.
um and it kind of brings us full circle that people change. If you gotta adapt on a film set, you gotta be able to adapt in real life to real situations. It's a whole life story, I guess.
Yeah,
um
keeps things interesting,
yeah.
man.
Well, I mean, the biggest philosophers in the world tell you don't worry about the future and don't worry about the past. Don't worry about where you are, because if you're trying to figure out, if you had a crystal ball and you wanted to figure out what your future was, you wouldn't want to know that, because then where all the fun in life go.
Right,
But
right. Yeah, it's in the moment. In the moment. It's been
um
great talking to you. Thanks for having me,
yeah,
Jimmy.
yeah, I was actually gonna say, do you want to just give us where we can find stuff about your film?
Oh yeah. I think I sent an email to you and to the two
Mm-hmm.
young women doing social media stuff, but I think our Instagram account is the future of coffee film
Okay.
at the future of coffee film. Let me look at this. I should have it somewhere.
Yeah, I
It,
just
it was the future of coffee doc, and then we changed it to film because it just makes more sense. Future of
mhm.
coffee film. Yeah, future of coffee film.
All right.
And then I think we're having a web page built, and I mean, this is all stuff that I don't, that like they're doing some TikTok stuff, they're doing YouTube shorts. Um, as I get that information of those different handles, I can get that to you. So yeah, they're
Yeah.
the social media stuff are doing a great job.
Awesome. Well, it'll all be in the description.
Yeah, for now you can check us out at Future Coffee Film on
Okay.
Instagram.
Yeah, so go check that out. Everything will be linked in the description when this video goes live, and I hope everyone has a nice day. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Always good to see you.